Coding is great, and for most, the most satisfying part of the job is hitting that execute button and the code executes flawlessly without any errors or warnings. I mean, we can dream. When that code executes flawlessly, something inside us just clicks and you get this incredible feeling of satisfaction. But development does not stop at you writing the last piece of code or hitting execute and it runs flawlessly. No. There's actually something far more crucial that you need to include in your developing process. Let's talk about a word that some might think of as a slur or even a war crime. Let's talk about test. It's safe to say that a sentiment among developers, software engineers, and coding enthusiasts is that testing is the worst, even though I think it is in tight competition with documentation. But it's actually a super crucial part of the software development lifecycle and a very, very important part of your development process. So what? You want me to do the tester's job? No, that's not what I'm implying. I'm not implying you need to now go and create 1,000 test cases, run it against all of these things, raise bug reports and incident reports and do all of these crazy things. No, testers do a ton of other work that is very important for quality control and risk mitigation, but there can be a lot of admin with that. What I'm proposing is instead of just developing your process normally, hitting the execute button, seeing a green tick mark, and then moving on to the next thing, let's rather change our mindset from getting the task done as quick as possible to a testing first mindset, meaning we develop a process with testing in mind. The kind of testing you need to do, and look, a lot of times we do have a testing department, but many smaller projects do not, is testing on your code, making sure that it executes without any errors, running as expected, that it hits all of the requirements, and making sure that it's able to integrate with the system that we're building it for. Defining software testing can be a little bit complicated, but for our purposes, let's say testing for software developers is evaluating that the code that we've developed executes as expected, integrates with the system and its standards, and meets all of the requirements. Naturally, we can make it a lot more complex than that. We need to do positive testing, negative testing, neutral testing, and all of that mumbo jumbo. But let's first get you on the bandwagon. Okay, fine, but why do I need to test? What's in it for me? For one, it increases your quality of work, making not only your life easier, but also your employer happier. You will also find bugs and errors before you even merge your code, meaning that there are much less pull requests or fixes in the repo or whatever. Testing also gives you a chance to ensure that your code won't break the system and won't truncate the entire operational database in the first time that it runs. Can you imagine that? A much more chill deployment experience?
A man can dream, though. A man can dream.
And it can save on overtime, because if you test thoroughly and ensure that your code is working, you won't have to go back and redo or rework a bunch of things. Naturally, a testing first mindset also comes with much more broad benefits for your project, such as it reduces risk on the project. It reduces overall costs that may come in with bugs or incidents. It reduces rework by a massive margin. And it can just increase the overall quality of your code. Of course, there are many more benefits that we don't list here, but you can find them by simply typing into Google, what are the benefits of software testing? IBM did a whole study on it. Okay, that is all fantastic. But I don't have time for it. I'm running from ticket to ticket. As soon as I finish one, I have to pick up the next one. And I don't have time to set up test cases and go through my code diligently, run it 1,000 times with different things and different doodads and what. Look, I know you're busy, but here's the thing. Testing can solve a lot of future problems for you now. The problem is it's kind of hard to gauge how many problems you will pick up now because of your testing and how much time you're going to save because of it. Unless, of course, you have access to a parallel dimension in which you don't do testing and then measure how that ends up being versus the one that you are testing. It's hard. But what you can do is you can start with a testing first mindset and doing just a few things here and there to see if this project has a better outcome than your previous one. What's the worst that can happen? Your incident tickets and bug tickets get decreased and your boss is much more happy because now you can focus on what's actually important. Also remember, many times when we have to do rework, the pressure is on because now you need to work on this bug fix or this incident fix or whatever, and you also have to work on the code for your current project. Essentially, it turns you from this into this at the age of 25. You can dev with a testing mindset by starting your development process by firstly thinking of scenarios that you need to code for. By doing this, you will allow yourself to think through the process. It will make testing easier later. It will make error handling a lot easier because now you've already identified possible errors that you need to code for. So you don't have to constantly test it. Oh, it breaks here. Let me go and put a try catch here. No, you're already coding that into your solution. And it will also force you to think of what might happen or what response your code will have to when something unexpected happens. You can also say that, look, we have Jenkins and Selenium and what, but remember, somebody needs to go and set those up. And it also takes time for you to push your code into the repo, build it, and then have tests run on it, and then go through the reports, blah, 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 blah. What if you can save a bunch of time by firstly doing a few manual tests just to ensure that your code is executing as expected? This will save you a lot of time and possibly a lot of frustration. Let's at least try to catch the obvious issues, okay? Great, so where to start? Naturally, testing can be quite complicated and it can be an art on its own. There's positive testing, negative testing, neutral testing. Do I need to set up test cases? Do I need to do a ton of documentation? For starters, let's keep it simple. Let's talk about a quick testing process. So you finished your code and it's executing as expected. And you just want to test it before sending it onto the repo or deploying it or whatever kind of environment you're working in. Let's do 3 test types. Number 1, positive testing. A positive test is a happy world test. It's a test in which everything happens as expected. Let's look at 2 scenarios. Number 1, you created an input field on your screen. Test that it's able to capture whatever you inputted there. Or number 2, you created a file importer, and if you run it, it imports the data into your database or whatever. Number 2, neutral testing. Neutral testing is that everyday test. It's how the system will behave when it's used on a daily basis. So let's look at the example of our input field. What happens if the user accidentally makes a finger fault and they type an A instead of a number in that field, or it's expecting a date and they accidentally put a dash instead of a slash? And as for our file importer, is it able to run multiple times a day? What happens if a file doesn't come in for that day? What kind of error handling is required for our everyday operations? Number 3, negative testing. Here we try to break our code. Just try a few scenarios that you think will absolutely break it and check that it behaves as expected. So when looking at our input field, if it expects a date, what happens if I input a string in there? Or what happens if I input a date that is 1,000 years in the future? Should it be able to accept that date? And as for our file importer, let's see what happens if the delimiter changes from a comma to a pipe. Does it throw an error and stop the process from executing? Or does it partially import data that's totally incorrect and unusable? Now, by practicing these 3 testing types, we've already identified multiple errors that can occur, and that'll save us a lot of time in the future, trust me on this. Naturally, we can go into a lot more detail. We can create full-on test cases and create bug reports and have graphs and dashboards and everything, but let's just start with the basics. Let's start by creating a testing first mindset in our heads when we develop. You also won't be great at it the first time. This is something that you need to practice. Like many habits, practice makes perfect. Keep an eye on my channel by hitting the subscribe button. I'll be doing more videos on testing, soft skills, and anything that I think of that I think is useful for the developer community. Hope this helps. Cheers.